to make some predictions about Bitcoin, because as Bitcoiners, we want to know, right, when Bitcoin is going to reach 10,000, 100,000, a million, and so on. And so I started to make these models, predictive models. The missing piece was I didn't look at time. I don't know why. Then, as I told you, over these 2 years, that will go from 3 o'clock all the way to 9. So 9 is when the bull market starts. The system needs to kind of adapt to be a power load. It takes time, then it's almost perfect. Look at this. Look at this here. Almost perfect on top of that line. Then I think that the fact that we are following a power law shows there is something good here. Now, what is the difference? So now we can look at the trend, and then you can subtract the data from the trend. And in particular, because we see these bubbles, and when you measure it, actually, they seem to happen very regularly every 4 years.
Welcome everyone. Today I'm joined by Giovanni Santostasi, a Bitcoiner, a scientist who has been applying a power law to Bitcoin as well. Giovanni, I know you got into Bitcoin around 2012, so maybe could you kick things off by introducing yourself and giving us some insights into your experience, maybe even prior Bitcoin. I know how eventually you discover Bitcoin. Thanks first of all for accepting the invitation, and let's.
My pleasure. Yeah. I'm Italian. I was born in Italy. I moved to the United States around 1992. So it's a little bit. I have been here a little bit, mostly for my studies. I am actually a PhD in physics. And I spent my focus as a researcher was in gravitational waves. That is a very cutting edge. In fact, actually, there are themes in some of the things I did during my career. For example, when I was a graduate student, I bet in this field of gravitational waves. It was kind of almost like the Bitcoin of science at the time, because it was a bet because nobody even observed a gravitational wave yet, right? It was postulated by Einstein, and at that time we didn't discover them. So we were trying to find these things, and it was kind of a bet, like very early adopter of this new way of seeing the universe. Sorry for that. But I always like to do things on the edge, to do things, new things, exploring new ideas, and so on. And it was really exciting because it was a new thing. And then I became a professor. I taught for about 9 years. I was in Louisiana, the south of the United States. I was teaching in a small college, and during the financial crisis, they decided to reorganize the university because we had a crisis, so we didn't have a lot of physics students, so they had to close the physics department and keep some of the personnel. I was one of the latest people joining, so I had to basically find another job, and it was kind of a shock because it was during that year I was supposed to get tenure. By the way, in America, it's this process where if you work hard, you get like a secure job. It is very difficult here in America to get. And so, but it was an opportunity because I say, okay, let's take this as a way of reinventing myself. So I went to neuroscience. changed my career. I started to study something else. And again, the team there, relatively to what our main topic of discussion was, I brought to this new field for me of neuroscience the approach of a physicist. So I started to look at things in a different way than most of the people, bringing tools that maybe were there are more and more physicists or even neuroscientists that are using more mathematical tools, more things from the field of physics, but it's still relatively new, right? So I was surrounded by people who didn't know even how to code or maybe to look at things in a more mathematical way. And I got, even as a beginner, I got success almost immediately. I started to publish papers. I even have a patent in the field of neuroscience for a device that improves your memory while you're sleeping. And it can be used for Alzheimer and all kind of things like that. But yeah, it was really cool because in a sense, I found some of the resistance also to some of these ideas that I see right now with the power law, right? Because people were not used to certain things. So I had to explain it to them in a certain way, etc. Things that to me were normal as a physicist, like almost trivial, so it was an interesting experience. And during the time, in these transitions, I actually heard about Bitcoin. So in fact, the first time I heard about Bitcoin was 2010. I downloaded the wallet, and people don't realize, right? They think that, I wish I was back at that time when things were just started. I didn't realize all the difficult things that were happening. Even if you had the mental openness, because I was open in that way because I am kind of like technology. I jump in new things very easily. For me, it's like second nature. It's sometimes difficult because it's more complicated, right? With technology is more expensive or more complicated to use. Same thing applied with Bitcoin. So the instruction for mining was quite complicated. It was meant for people that had some computer science experience. And, I could do it if I focus enough on it, but, I didn't have the motivation because Bitcoin was worth almost nothing. I realized the importance of it, but maybe not fully enough. But that is a lesson that maybe we want to share with the viewers, that you should never put aside anything related with Bitcoin. Don't never say, because I didn't say, oh, I don't want to do this. I downloaded it wallet and I say, let me come back to it. But you should never do that with Bitcoin. Let's come back to it.
Yes,
But 2 years later,
just to interrupt you, people. I mean,
yeah,
I
sure,
also rejected the idea of Bitcoin initially because it's hard to really grasp Bitcoin. First time you hear about it, that's why. I mean, I
yeah,
always encourage people. Okay, spend at least 10 or 20 hours studying Bitcoin, and then answer the question if you want to spend more time and digest it more, or reject the idea, because I mean, most people reject the idea of Bitcoin initially, and and
yeah.
I came back like several years later. Obviously, I mean that for me that was 2017, so we were very
Yeah,
early, like 2010.
I
It's
didn't
super early.
reject it because actually I liked it. In fact, I didn't. What I didn't do, I didn't fully appreciate at that time in 2010 the potential, right? Because if I did, then I will have spent all the time to learn and do the mining. I like the idea of mining because actually I was playing video games where I had like in particular, these science fiction video games where I had like these spaceships going and mining and bringing materials so you could build, fighting spaceships, so you had a, um, I even wrote some code to go and mine automatically while I was sleeping, and probably it was kind of cheating. I should not have done that, but I did it. And so it didn't sound strange to me that you could mine online, that many people resist the idea. How can you online? To me, it was natural, like, yeah, sure, it's the same thing. And this is real money, though, because I understood that people eventually we use it as real money. Now, at that time, I didn't realize, it could be thousands or hundreds of thousands. It didn't click yet, but I didn't reject it. There was never a point where I say, "Oh, this is a stupid idea," or "I don't like, I don't understand something." I didn't fully appreciate, let's say that, because otherwise I would have mine. Because at that time you could mine with your laptop, you could the mining was not very difficult. Today, you have to use all these specialized machines, not at that time. And then and about being early, it's so funny because even if I joined, so eventually joined, right? It was 2012, so a couple of years later. And I was still keeping track of Bitcoin and what was going on. But the big message came when I read that I'm very interested in futurism, in trying to understand future technologies, future trends, and in particular, how these trends can affect our life. In fact, um, I discovered more or less at that time also this thing called transhumanism, that is this idea that maybe we can heal aging, we can cure aging and we can make people young again using technology, and extend our lives and go to Mars, explore. To me, these things are amazing, like AI, that is coming out right now. So there was a newsletter that I was subscribed to, and this newsletter explained things from a transhumanist point of view. It said, many of us want to, many that are part of this movement, because it's like a intellectual movement, a social movement, want to change the world. We want to defeat cancer. We want to send people to Mars. We want to do all these amazing things, but we don't have the resources. And this article, Bitcoin was like $9 at the time when this article came out. And I said, guys, if you join in right now, this coin, and he explained the technology, didn't understand. He was a technology, so he could understand it very well. And it was even now that article is amazing if one reads it, because it does a very good summary of what Bitcoin is. And imagine, it was written 12 years ago, so it was very visionary. And in particular, the visionary part was, it was not telling us that it was going to $10, $100, even $1,000. He was talking about millions, So imagine you come in and say, "Oh, this thing is $9, and one day will be million." Most people thought of it, would think that this guy is crazy. What did he, smoke or whatever? People like me and his audience thought, "Oh yeah, sure, it can go to $1 million." So all of us thought that, yeah, it was possible. If you understood the technology, if you understood what he was trying to do, to basically replace cash in general, to be the monetary system of the world. And so that article orange pilled me, so I decided, okay, now it's time, I need to jump in. And this when I spent the time that you said, many, many hours that I digged in. I read the white paper from Satoshi. I started to understand the technology in its depth, but also being a physicist, I wanted to see the data. I wanted to see if it was a precise pattern in the behavior. And the article, strangely enough, had a chart, like one of the earliest chart that I ever saw about Bitcoin. And remember, at that time, we had probably 2 years of data because, the exchanges opened around 2010. So we didn't have a lot of good data the first year of Bitcoin because we were like, no recorded transactions. Some of them, we know that this happened. They were people exchanging between them, some cash. There is the famous pizza day, when the guy bought two pizza for $10,000, crazy stuff like that. And I think the early recorded transaction is in 2009, like middle, where one of the people around Satoshi, one of the people that helped him, making a website and looking at the code. I don't remember his name, but
Marty Mountain,
he,
maybe, right?
yeah,
Martin.
exactly. Yeah, exactly, him. He sold 5,000 Bitcoin for $1. Can you imagine? Incredible, right? And so, these are, we know a few of these transactions, but we didn't have a consistent buying and selling like we had once we had the first exchanges. So usually when people do charts, they start from that date, right? And I think it was August 2010 when Mt. Gox started to open and have consistent transactions. So we have continuous data since that date, right? And this article was in 2012. So it had like a couple of years of data, and we were trying already to see some pattern there, right? And the guy was plotting Bitcoin, and again, being a technology, being a scientist, I think the guy is an engineer. Um, he was drawing some line saying this is the scientific pattern, and he was claiming it was an exponential, and nowadays we know it's not an exponential, but maybe if you had a little data, and it grew so fast, that will have been the conclusion, like an approximation. And the other thing he was claiming, he was looking at one of these bubbles, and all these are relevant things for the things I study now, understanding the bubbles, understanding the general path. And he was saying, look, we had this bubble, and that bubble, I think we went like from $1 or something all the way to $20, $30. It went like crazy. It was like exponentially growing like a bubble, right? Uh, and then it crashed. And at that time, everybody was saying, "Oh, Bitcoin is this scam. It's like the tulip, the famous event that happened in the 1700s, where everybody went crazy about these tulips, and then it was a new flower. It looked beautiful, but they were selling it at higher and higher price, and then they realized we can make as many as we want, right? We can plant them in the ground, and they are not that difficult because they grow in the ground. You can reproduce them, right? And the price, like money printing, right? We can print this stuff as much as we want, and so the price crash, and many people lost a lot of money. And so that is used a lot as an example of a speculative bubble, where people get into a frenzy and buy something that is maybe good, but no that worth, right? And then it will crash. And he was saying, no, Bitcoin is not this because you see, it actually recovered. So we had a little bit of data where it shows that it recovered and actually continue on the path, almost like if a bubble didn't exist. And so he said, bubble, yeah, it's a local bubble, but it's not the entire phenomenon. It's not a bubble because this type of bubble, like the tulips, never recover, right? Once they go down, like you can go here in the United States to Walmart, and buy tulip for a few cents. It's not that they are very cheap, right? Now the bubble deflated. They didn't go to zero because you still need to pay for the tulips, but it costs nothing. It costs very little. Uh, and so all these arguments were convincing to me because I wanted to understand the math, and so I downloaded the data. I started to analyze the data. I was not convinced that it was an exponential, but at that time we didn't have a lot of data. But it was very irregular. It was I thought this is different. It's different from other stocks. It's growing very fast. It seems there are these irregularities. And so I got orange pilled and I went in pretty heavy. I don't tell you all the details for obvious reasons, but I made a huge big bet, on Bitcoin. Like I made a huge big bet in other things in my life, studying crazy stuff or changing the field. And so, and almost before, actually before even buying my first Bitcoin, I studied Bitcoin scientifically. That is kind of my relationship with Bitcoin all these years. I wanted to study as if it was a field of astronomy, of neuroscience, like any other event. And so that is kind of a theme. And I found that these power law patterns very early because there was in physics we use power laws. In a moment we can explain what they are, the importance, but there are these relationships that we find in nature, and I will not say everything is a power law, but a lot of natural phenomena are described by power laws. And power laws are basically it's a technical term that we use to describe this relationship between two quantities, and they are special ones because they have the main property of this power law is that the relationship between these two quantities. So imagine I write an equation, y equal, some constant, and then you have x, that is the other quantity, right, that you want to relate to. So one is the independent variable and the other one is dependent. Independent is x, right? So some quantity that you think drives or maybe is the cause of the other one. Because in physics, we don't care so much about things that are maybe correlated, but maybe we have a third cause, or we always try to find some kind of causal links, right? Because we want to explain the universe. We want to say these things drives this other thing, right? We look for laws in nature. And so X, it's your independent quantity. And if you have a power, and power means X to the something, right? Square, cube, or whatever, that number doesn't have to be an integer. It can be 3.9, 1.4, can be even negative. A negative will mean that you are dividing, right? So it will be 1 over x to the square, for example. And it can be a fraction of, it doesn't have to be bigger than 1. It can be 0.1. It can be any number. Then you call this relationship a power law, because that exponent, it's also called the power. I mean, it's a technical term because I see sometimes people rejecting the idea because they say, "Oh, it's a law," and something like Bitcoin cannot be described by a law. What do you mean is a law? It's not like a gravity. It's just a technical term. In this particular case, it will mean there is such a regularity, such a strong regularity between two things, like, for example, price and time, that it looks like a law in the sense that it's very regular, it seems to not be just something that lasts few months and then it goes away. It's not just some kind of temporary pattern. It's very strong. But, it's not law with the big L, like the gravitational law of Newton, of the laws of motion of Newton. These are big L kind of laws, but it's a technical term. It means there is a relationship between two quantities that follows a particular equation. This is the equation. Now, what is very essential in this equation is that exponent, because so the trivial case is where the exponent is 1, right? In that case, you will have a linear relationship between these quantities. And there are many relationships like that in nature where one quantity changes gradually, like proportional to the other one. You do find patterns like that in nature. Usually it's when one quantity changes very little and the other one also change not much, and if you look in that little range, then it looks linear. Usually nature doesn't have a lot of linear things, but that could be a situation. But if the exponent is different from 1, then you have a very interesting situation because we call these systems non-linear. And they behave in a very interesting way because whenever you have a non-linear system, a small change in X can produce a big change in Y. And, these systems are very interesting because, they have all kinds of complex behaviors. and we call them, in fact, complex systems, and so there is in particular, recently physics has that went down, the rabbit hole of these nonlinear systems, and we find a lot of interesting behaviors. And in fact, nature tends to be like that, no very non-linear in its behavior. And so, I was very familiar with this because it's part of our training. They are teaching us about power laws. We find them often. We have different tools to discover them and then study them. But the missing piece for me was I didn't realize that I was not up to date, let's say, that physics was moving. I knew that many physicists started to work with biology and started to bring some of our tools in biology. In fact, when I went to neuroscience, that's what I was doing. I was studying actually the brain as a physical system using physics tools. It's very complex. It's because when you're dealing with biology, of course, it's much more messy and irregular, and interesting. But that doesn't mean that you cannot apply the tools that we have in math and physics. You can. It's just that, you will have to be a little bit more careful. There is much more complexity to deal with. But you can find regular patterns that you will not expect to be there, in biology and in physiology and so on. What I was missing is that physicists also started to study social systems. I didn't have that part. Maybe I heard about it, but I was not very aware of the research that people were doing in that field. And then one day I saw this video from this physicist that to me right now it's my guide and my inspiration. His name is Jeffrey West. So in fact, I invite all your viewers to go and buy his book because it should be considered almost like the new Bitcoin standard. Right? Every Bitcoiner reads this book called the Bitcoin Standard. It's like kind of almost the Bible. After the white paper, it's probably one of the most read book or information for the Bitcoiners. And I suggest until I write the book that is going to be called The Physics of Bitcoin, then hopefully that will also be considered a very important book. You can read this book by Jeffrey West because it's also very general. He talks about the importance of these power laws everywhere in nature and how understanding them allow us to understand the world, the different phenomena that are around us. But it goes even beyond that because the book is called Scale. That is one of the main properties. In fact, we are going to discuss it in our discussion. It's one of the most important properties of power law. This idea that power laws allow us to look at the world through the lenses of scale, this idea of scale. And scale, just to give we are going to a little bit deeper, but just to give you an idea, it's a way of looking at the world where you're looking at a phenomena that changes over many orders of magnitude. And what do I mean for orders of magnitude? I mean a change of it, it's a large change. So I go from 10 to 100,000, 10,000, and so on, right? So imagine I look at the animal kingdom from a scale point of view. So I look at all the different type of life from very small organism like a mouse all the way to the elephant and say, okay, if I look at life like that, right, there are all these organisms and interested, is there something that a pattern that I can find in describing how these animals change? Is there anything that relates their size and something else? Like, so let's say, I'm interested in how much energy they consume, right? Is there a particular pattern? Is there some kind of link, that explain how this changing the size of an animal makes them consume more energy, or maybe their heartbeat, or maybe how many brain cells we are, right? The size of their brain relatively to their mass. So if you study a phenomena like that, life, let's say, maybe you can even go all the way to cells, right? And say how much energy a cell is consuming. Is there a pattern from going from a cell all the way to a full organism made of billions and trillions of cells, right? Or is it all disorganized where there is not a pattern, it's all random, or there is a pattern? Right? So if you're focusing on a phenomena where you're focusing on the scale, right? Because all the animals are, you don't care going from, like a mouse to 1.2 times the mouse size, right? You're interested, okay, what if I change by a factor of 10? I look at an animal that is 10 times bigger than a mouse. What if I go, and maybe as a cat or whatever, what if I go 10 times bigger than that? So you're looking at the phenomena from the scale point of view, then you start to see these patterns that you will not be able to see if you focus on small changes. And that is one of the properties. And with Bitcoin, you can see the relevance because Bitcoin went, we were just discussing, right, how some of the early transactions were $1 for 5,000. So usually when you do these order of magnitude arguments, you round up to the closest 10. In that case, you will say, 5,000, let me say that is 1 over 10,000, and so in that case will be 10 to the minus 4, because we use this scientific notation where we look at the exponent of a number. So minus 4 will mean it's 1 over a number with 4 zero, right? 10,000 is 1 and 4 zero. So 10 to the minus 4, there was the price of Bitcoin at the time, dollars, all the way to almost 60,000, 65,000, right? We went to 70,000. So you will round it up to 100,000, right? So you will say we had a span that goes all the way to 10 to the minus 4 to 10 to the 5, right? That is 100,000. That one, if you look at all the changes in order of magnitude, it's 9 orders of magnitude. So it's enormous change. It's like if you're going from, if you do it with the size of an animal and it's a weight, let's say, it's all the way from going 10,000 kilograms, so basically it's kind of like an elephant, all the way to something that is a fraction of a kilogram, that is basically like a little mouse or even smaller than that, right? So it's that kind of variation in size that Bitcoin went through. And so if you're studying it from the scale point of view, you reveal patterns that you were not able to reveal if you are focusing on the changes of daily changes or even monthly changes. You're looking at the overall pattern, right? The scale point of view. And that is amazing because that is actually the physicist's way of looking at things. And then you can find patterns that you were not able to find before. And to
Yeah, and
me,
many people
if you
just
have a
to
question, yeah.
yeah, because many people were thinking, including myself in the past, that Bitcoin grows exponentially, right? Because it grew up so fast over the last 15 years. We already know that Bitcoin is following power law, and I think for many people, I mean, the concept of power law is not that familiar. I mean, people understand what exponential is more or less, but power laws is something new. You said Bitcoin is not exponential, which is good, not bad. So maybe we can explain, like,
Yeah,
for
we
those who
can
are
dive
familiar,
in.
yeah.
Yeah, and I
What
have
is the
some
difference
slides
between
for
like a
that.
power law and the exponential, or
Yeah,
maybe even
absolutely.
just to digest the power law even more, like just a simple example from the nature of the real life,
Yeah.
like what
And we
is
are
around us that grows
they
exponentially?
are related, and we are going to explain the difference between the two in a second. I want to show you some slides. But I was trying to tell you, right, that the influence of this Jeffrey West in my thinking, because what happened is that I saw TED lecture. I don't know if I was, in YouTube or whatever, and this was around 2013. And he had a this beautiful lecture. Maybe we can put it in the description of this interview so people can actually watch it. And he wrote the book, but he's also a very, very good speaker. And in this lecture, he was explaining how, this evolution that I told you, going from physical system to biology. In fact, this is what he did in his life. It actually, like the adventure of his life. He started to explore all these different fields using the tools of physics. And of course, in physics, these power laws are so important that he was finding these power laws everywhere. But eventually moved to social system. That was the link for me to actually see how this power law could be relevant to Bitcoin, because I understood that it's some kind of social interaction between people. It's not just a financial system. It has also to do with people exchanging information, interacting between each other, right? It's kind of a social movement in a sense, awareness movement, with this idea of orange peeling. And he was mentioning cities. So he started to study cities with the tools of physics. And they started to find these power laws everywhere. They found power laws in the growth of a city, in the number of gas stations in the cities. The GDP of a city is a power law. Many crimes in a cities are committed is a power law.
Yeah, so for example,
not
I was reading that like uh, once you change the size of the citizens in a city, like if the city grows by a factor of two, then you can expect like to earn 15% more in that city in an average, right? And so if you move
exactly.
from like a city which has 1 million citizens to a city with 2 million citizens, I wasn't sure citizens or GDP, but then you can earn 15% more. And then you move from 2 million to 4 million, again, you can earn 15% more. So
Right.
that's interesting
Exactly.
that cities are
Very
following.
interesting. And people, will think, no, human beings are not amenable. There is no a law or some mathematical pattern that explain the behavior of people. Well, gas station in a city, it's not that there is a committee that comes together and say, hey guys, we need to follow a power law. It's very important. Let's have more gas station, less gas station. How many do we have? It happens naturally, right? And if you start to understand why and the mechanism behind, then you understand why it's relevant for Bitcoin, because it's basically the same thing, the same type of pattern that determine how many gas stations there are in a cities, or many crimes, etc. But they are all human activities. So you cannot argue and say, like, many people I have, maybe a little by little, they are disappearing, these people, because I'm making such a big deal, and people listen to me. But I still have people coming and say, no, human beings cannot be described by mathematics. There are no mathematical. No, there are. That is a fact. Unfortunately, in the Bitcoin standard, because the person that wrote Bitcoin standard has this particular angle that is called the Austrian economics, and they don't like, the school of thought doesn't like the idea of describing people using mathematics. Maybe some people also use that way of thinking. But unfortunately, for West Austrian economics, it's not true, because we have all this evidence, hundreds of papers that people wrote that explain. And when we work as groups, aggregates, there are mathematical patterns, very precise ones. And you can use them to make predictions, to actually, because these are predictive patterns, like you say, people can even use it in thinking, oh, okay, if our city is going to grow and we invest and we make the city grow, we will have this increase in the economy. And it's predictive because it happens pretty regularly, exactly like that, like the pattern. And you will think, right, oh, there are, because that is the other things that people say about my study with Bitcoin. They say, and what if this happened? And what if that happened? Well, it could happen also in a city. What if a big, huge company comes and brings a lot of jobs in the city? And does it break the power law? No, it doesn't break the power law. You know why? Because the company likely will move into a city. It's a statistical thing, right? It could happen that there is a company that wants to do a weird things, and it goes into a small city and it disrupts the economy of that city, and there is a big jump, right? Then eventually think we'll still continue to move along a power law. But temporarily, they make a big, huge change in the city that is not proportional to where the city is because it's a big disruptor. But in general, what happens that the companies will go to the city that are proportional to where the company is in that particular place, right? They will say, I'm going to the city that can support my activity, where I can find enough workers, where the economy is big enough, where the transportation is good enough, etc. So that event of a company moving to that city, it is part of that growth along the power law, because everything that is part of the idea, but everything that happens to a city happens proportionally to where the city is. That is actually what generates power laws. It's a process that is an iterative process. It's like a feedback loop. This is how power laws come in the first place, because it's a feedback loop, right? The city grows, attracts more people. They want to go to the city, attracts company, attracts institutions, because that is part also of the power law story. It works at all scales. It's called a scale invariant system. So there are little individuals that go to the city. There are medium companies that go to a city. There are large institutions, banks, etc. Even government starts to intervene when the city is big enough, right? It's an important, maybe the government opens facilities or centers over there. Everything is proportional to where the city is, right? And this is how you get rise to the power law. And when Jeffrey West was describing this, and then he had like even some poetries, was talking about how the communication systems of a city looks like the nervous system. He was saying how the streets and the roads, etc., they are almost like the circulatory system of the body. That it has heart, etc. It was very poetic, but based on mathematics and science, right? It's not just some fantasy. I had this vision, almost like a vision, that Bitcoin was exactly like that. I said, oh, okay. So I bet Bitcoin also follows power laws. And so I went back and started to look at the data, and I started to find my first power laws. And this was 2013. I found power laws between the price and addresses. I found power laws between price and hash rate. I found power laws between price and transactions. I didn't have yet, and I was shocked by that, right? It was like amazing, like, oh, look, I'm right, there are these power laws. It was beautiful because it meant there was these patterns and this regularity in Bitcoins that others didn't observe. I was the first one to mention power laws in Bitcoin, as early as 2013. And then the idea was, okay, how we can use this information to make some predictions about Bitcoin, because as Bitcoiners, we want to know, right, when Bitcoin is going to reach 10,000, 100,000, a million, and so on. And so I started to make these models, predictive models. The missing piece was I didn't look at time. I don't know why, because I was now maybe thinking that the growth of a let's say, for example, the addresses, because you can use addresses as a proxy for adoption, followed a power law, because I was not familiar with the literature, the social studies that people did. Just as a spoiler, today we know, because people started to study social network, in particular physicists are very interested in that kind of things. We found that the growth of social networks is also a power law, the growth in time. Social network tends to grow as power laws. And as a spoiler, because maybe people saw other videos about me, etc., we found the same thing, that the adoption of Bitcoin is a power law. But I didn't know at that time. So I was assuming these S curves, right? So many people mention the S curve. And the reason why I thought about the S curve was that many technologies follow this growth, this type of growth. And that type of growth has to do with what also we were discussing before, early adopter, people will come later. So basically, if you think about adoption as some kind of a bell curve where there are early adopters here on the left, that are few and early, then they adopt the technology, they are innovators, and it takes time to catch up, and then more and more people come in, and then there'll be a point where everybody does it because it's basically you're reaching the top of a bell curve, and that means everybody is adopting, that's a common thing. That is the average, right? The average person adopts the technology, and then, there are no more people okay, you reach like 50% of the population, then more and more people join in, and then there'll be less and less people because basically you kind of, like, let's say this applies to Bitcoin, you orange peeled almost everybody, so there'll be less and less people to orange peel. And then, the last person on top of a mountain, we never heard about anything, but finally he gets orange peel too. This will be the right. If you look at how that type of adoption looks like on a graph that describe the time, right? The time versus how many people, total people are adopting, it looks like an S curve. And for the mathematical people, it's basically like the integral, right? It's the integral of this bell curve.
Yeah, so S curve basically has some ceiling, right? So you
as a some ceiling, right? Because it's when everybody adopts the technology, and also it is exponential, so it grows, and it's in fact is an exponential, it goes faster. So it starts slow and it goes faster. There is a point where it goes the fastest, and it is basically when you reach 50% of the population, when it becomes almost like, it looks like kind of almost vertical, and then it starts to slow down because there are less people to orange peel, right? Because basically at least 50% is orange peel. You start to add more and more people, and basically you're reaching 100, and then it kind of saturates, and becomes, it never goes to, it never stops because there is always somebody, left over, at least the mathematical form of it. It has like what is called an asymptote there, but it kind of flattens out, and I assume that type of growth, and for me, and this is why I make a big deal about this, because there's still here, even professionals, like people in big company that does this analysis for their customers, these are supposed to be professional people that pay that hundreds of thousands of dollars. I was talking with Fidelity people the other day, and they were still, I was telling them, no, why don't you look at the data? You're supposed to look at the data, and Bitcoin doesn't follow that. It doesn't. But, it's a kind of a natural assumption because people that are familiar with technology, we hear about this S curve, so we are assuming that Bitcoin also follows that. And if you, in my case, I had this model of how the price reacts to the addresses, because see, we have all this information from the what is called the blockchain, right? That gives us the information about how many addresses are being produced, how many the hash rate in the system. So you can use all this information to kind of trying to understand the behavior of Bitcoin. The addresses are the closest things that we have to basically account of how many Bitcoiners there are, because it should be, that number of addresses should be proportional to the number of people that are using the system, right? Not one-to-one, because again, I get a lot of pushback on that, because say, well, one person can open 10 addresses, right? Or can use 100 addresses or whatever. Another person, maybe just one, right? How do you deal with that? I deal with that like, okay, somebody that is very active in the network, that is common, like in social network, like you have thousands of people watching your videos. I have 40,000 people. Not all, when you're thinking about a system like a network, there are these things called nodes, that is basically, in our case, will be the Bitcoiners. So, it's where the information is processed, etc., where things are happening, right? It could be the body where we have cells, and all different kind of activities are happening inside the cells. They are basically the units of a network, right? And then there are the links between the network. So there are some nodes this is the technical term that we use for the centers in the network that are more connected than others, right? So this person will do a lot of things, and is like somebody that in a network that has more connection, like a city, a big city is kind of like a hub, right? Where a lot of roads go, like Rome, right? All the roads lead to Rome. It's a big network where a lot of things go there, and there are little cities where there are like little connections. It's a network. Not network don't have to have equal number of connections. All the nodes don't have to have equal number of connections. And so it's the same thing with the addresses. In physics, we always like to look at the simplest possible observable thing. We call it unobservable. So addresses are my place to go to understand how the networks is growing, the adoption. You can always say, okay, what if I really wanted to get the number of Bitcoiners, and then you can make some assumptions, and try to derive a number of Bitcoiners from that. But to me, it's not necessary. It's just some kind of measure of the activity of a network. And it turns out there is a very precise relationship between the price and the number of addresses. It's one of the first things I discovered, and it's called Metcalfe law. Metcalfe law says there was this engineer that when the internet came out, he actually invented the Ethernet cable, to connect different computers. And his company was trying to sell this little device because at that time it was so early that you actually had to buy this device from him. He was one of a few people that was selling. And then you had to put it inside your computer, or maybe, you have your IT people, if you are an institution, to install it. Right now, computers come with it, right? You plug in and you get connected to the internet. At that time, you actually had to buy an extra piece of hardware to put in your computer. And he was trying to sell them. I saw a lecture of him where he's saying he was selling them for $1,000, that only that little piece, right, to connect. And there was not even like, the internet was coming out, but was mostly connecting computer inside your institution, like local connections, maybe, computers connected to a printer, people, some kind of big computer where some big calculation of data was stored or whatever, right? And he was trying to convince people to buy more units, and it became almost like a advertising device, but it's based on reality. Like many advertising are based on bullshit, lies. In this case, it was a real scientific thing. He was saying, look, don't think about the value of your network being the number of computers that you have in your company, is how well connected they are. Because if you connect them, then the value, it's in the number of connection. And it turns out, if you do a calculation, that under the assumption that every computer is connected to all the others, right? That makes the calculation a little bit more simple, that the number of connections is proportional to the square of the nodes. So imagine that makes the value of your computers much higher, right? If you have a 4 computer, all of a sudden, the value of this network of 4 computers, if you connect them between each other, and of course, with the Ethernet cable, you could connect them. So, it was convincing argument. All of a sudden, the value of your network goes to 16. If you have 10 computers, right, then the value, it's actually 100, right? So it becomes bigger and bigger because of this square, non-linear phenomena, right? So he even showed a graph where, okay, this is the cost of the units that you're buying, but because you connect them, now all of a sudden the value of your network goes here, and there is a point where actually it makes real sense to buy a lot of these devices to make connecting the computers, because they can do more things, right? Many computers now, they can connect to a printer, they can talk with each other, you can send an internal email to somebody and improve communication. You can see how the value really makes sense. It goes up with how well connected the system is. And with the internet, we are aware of it, right? Because of the beauty of the internet, we all can connect with each other. We can have this talk that we are having right now. People can hear, they can come here. The number of connections is very important. And with Bitcoin, that is fundamental because it turns out that if you make a graph between the price and the number of addresses, you see this beautiful power law. And the power law, the slope of the power law, it's close to 2. And that is the exponent. So basically it's telling us that the price is proportional to the square of number of nodes if the addresses are the nodes of a network, right? And that is cool because if you think that addresses is somehow proportional to Bitcoiner, if you double the number of Bitcoiners, you get 4 times the value of Bitcoin. If you multiply by 3 the number of Bitcoiner, the value goes to 9.
Yeah.
4, 10, 100 times. So you
So
don't
for
need a
many
lot of
people,
Bitcoiners.
I think sorry to interrupt you, but I think for many
Yeah,
people
no, ask
yeah
questions.
that would be like exponential, right? So people are familiar with Metcalfe's law when this telecommunication network grows. I mean, value of the telecommunication network grows because you can connect with many people, so the growth is exponential. Uh, so I mean, if you
Well,
already
it's
said this.
not, yeah, it's not exponential. It's a power law.
It's a power law.
So,
So why is it power law, not exponential? I think that might be not clear for I mean, when you first think about power law, it's not that clear. Like, what's the difference
mhm.
really?
Yeah,
Uh,
and maybe can show you some slides. This
okay.
could be a good point for me to show you some slides. So let me share them. If I found a way to do that, share screen. Okay.